sorry about all that. A little bit about me. My name is Jessica, and I will be teaching reading and English. Today we are going to start with English. So a little bit about me. I just graduated from Bishop Heelan High School in Sioux City, and I'm new to Sioux Falls. Just yesterday I moved into college. I'm starting here at Augustana University, and I am majoring in nursing. So I met Manoj. I took his ACT class that he held my junior year of high school. It was leading up to the December ACT, and he held it at my school. My sister was also a tutor for him and took the ACT class that he held in the Dakota Dunes. So I was kind of familiar with his teaching, and so then I became a tutor for him, and then last year I taught ACT classes at Prodigy in the Dunes. And so before I took the class, I had a 26 on my ACT, and then that was leading up to the December ACT. So on that December one, my score went up 5 points. So I got a 31, and then I took it again and ended up getting a 34. So my score went up quite a bit, 8 points. And so hopefully the same thing can happen for you guys. Your scores can go up as well. So who here has taken the ACT already? Just by a show of hands. Okay, so mostly everybody. Let's see what time it is. Okay, so to do sort of a little bit of an introduction, we're just gonna do like show of hands, like which section you guys think is the easiest for you, and then the hardest. So we'll start with easiest, and I'll just like name off each of the sections and then raise your hand for that. So I want to preface this by saying that sometimes the section that's easiest for you is not necessarily the one that you've scored the best on. So sometimes it's just the one that you feel like when you're doing it, it makes the most sense to you and you don't have to work as hard for it. And doing this will just kind of help me get a sense of what sections you feel like you need more work on, and also that can kind of help me prepare for the coming classes and the things that we're doing. So let's start with the easiest section. How many of you think that English is the easiest section for you? Okay. Anybody math? Okay, reading and science. Okay, now for hardest, does anybody think English is the hardest section for them? Okay, math, reading, and science. Okay, so it looks like there's a pretty good mix with everyone here. It's not like everybody finds something easier. Like it's not like everybody thinks the same thing, so that can be kind of good. So I'm gonna first go through just kind of like some basic tips of like these will just kind of help you throughout. Some of these are kind of simple, but on the board, especially for English, I'll be going through grammar rules, and I'll have like I'll have examples. So I'll have example sentences that kind of show you what that looks like. A good tip is to write down whatever I put on that board, especially those example sentences, because when you go back and look at those can really help you to figure out where you're going wrong on some of the practice tests. If I talk too quickly or you don't catch something that I said, just ask me to repeat it or ask me what I mean by that. Sometimes I have a tendency to talk really quickly, so I'll try to slow down, but if you guys find that I'm talking too fast, or if something I say doesn't make sense, just have me repeat it. Another thing is you want to actually do the homework. So when you're doing the homework, you want to be doing it to learn and not just to be getting it done. So just make sure that you're making this class worth your time. I'm sure you'll hear it a lot of times, but you kind of get out of it what you put into it. So if you're not really putting in a lot of effort, then you're not gonna see the results that you want. When I took the ACT class at my school, I had a lot of friends who also took it, and some of them didn't do the homework like at all, or if they did, it was they quickly filled it in 15 minutes before the class started, and then their score didn't go up. Or if it did, it was maybe by 1 point, and they didn't get the scores that they wanted to. And so that just goes to show you that you need to put in the effort to get the results out of it. Come to class prepared if you have any questions on any of the homework, or if there's any specific sections or any specific parts of any of the English or reading sections that we go on. That will just help me know what to focus on, or if I go through something too fast and it doesn't make sense to you, then I know, okay, maybe we need to go through a couple more examples to explain that a little bit better. Also, don't be afraid to ask questions when I'm teaching. Asking questions will help you remember. It'll make the class a little bit more interesting. If you have any questions that when you're doing the homework at home, you can ask them in the next class, or I'm sure most of you have Manoj's phone number. You can text him and ask him any other questions that you have, and he'll normally reply back to that, or again, just come with it to the class and ask either Manoj, myself, or any of the other tutors that are teaching this class. And asking questions, it doesn't make you stupid. So don't feel bad because no question is a stupid question. If you're struggling on something, we want to make sure that you're understanding it. And most of the time there's somebody else in the class who's thinking the exact same thing or has the exact same question as you. Okay, so now when you're doing the homework, there should be, I don't know if he gave you a sheet or if he's just sending it out weekly. Follow that, whatever Manoj sends you. Make sure that you're doing that part of it. So don't try to do something else. So if he assigns you a science test and you don't feel like doing it, don't just do a different test just because. Make sure that you're actually doing the sections that are assigned, if that makes sense. And when you're doing your practice tests, make sure that you're taking them timed and you're taking them seriously. So when you're doing it times, that kind of helps to add that time pressure to you. So then when you go and take the actual ACT, you're not blindsided by that. You're not like, oh my gosh, I haven't been practicing with this and now I'm freaking out because I don't think I'm going to have enough time to finish. And then when you're correcting the practice tests, when you're correcting them, one thing that kind of helps is to, if you see that you got one wrong, just mark it as wrong, but don't mark in the correct answer. So then go back through it again and see if you can get the correct answer without looking at the answer, if that makes sense. And so that just kind of helps to make sure that you're understanding why you got it wrong or why the correct answer is correct instead of just, oh, I got this one wrong and you move on to the next one. So that'll help you learn. And then also, this goes for all of the tests, do the easiest questions first. If you find a question that's really hard, just skip it because they're worth the same amount of points. And then just, if you don't know an answer to a question, just bubble in an answer because it's better to just choose an answer and skip over it and come back to it if you have time at the end rather than wasting a bunch of time to answer that one question. Also, make sure that you mark that you skipped that one, or if you are skipping a question, make sure that you don't get all your bubbling answers wrong after that because that can really throw off all the rest of your answers. So let's say that you skipped question number 10, so then instead of bubbling in answer number 10, you bubble in the answer for number 11 in question 10's spot, so then all the rest of those till the end of the test are going to be in the wrong spot, and so that can really throw off your score, and that's just something that you don't want to have to try to deal with. Okay. And also, with guessing, you have a 25% chance of getting it right because there's 4 answer choices, and you have a 0% chance of getting it right if you don't mark it at all because you're going to get it wrong no matter what. Okay. So now we will start with some of the notes for English. So, like I said, we are going to be doing English today. Also, I apologize if you cannot read my handwriting. I'm not used to writing on a chalkboard, so if you can't read something, just let me know. Am I writing too small for the people in the back? Okay, I just want to make sure. Okay, so first we're going to talk about pacing with the English test. So I'm assuming, does everyone know what an editor is? Okay, so basically an editor is just someone who kind of looks over what someone else has already written, just to make sure that everything is grammatically correct and that kind of everything just flows together. So when you are doing the English test, you want to make sure that you are reading like an editor. So you want to read it quickly, but you also want to make sure that you're focusing on what you're reading. So you want to make sure that you're reading it conscientiously and that you're aware of like the actual stuff that you are reading. Make sure that you read every single answer, even if you think that the first one is the right one. Make sure you go through every single answer, because if an answer is just partly wrong at all, then don't choose that one. It's going to be completely wrong. So that's, a lot of times they can trick you, or a lot of people can go wrong with that because they just go through the answers quickly. They read the first answer choice, they're like, yeah, that's the right one, and they move on, even though there was probably a better choice. Maybe one of the other choices was a better choice for that. So just don't make stupid mistakes because you rushed yourself. One of the things that a lot of times students have trouble with on the English test is that they actually try to rush you, or they try to like prey on the fact that you are going to rush yourself. So in the English test, most of the time people don't have an issue with getting it done in time. Whereas like in the reading test, a lot of people have trouble getting it done in time. The English is kind of like the opposite side of that. A lot of people either get it done early or they find that they have enough time to do it. So make sure that you are pacing yourself and you're not like psyching yourself out thinking that you need to go faster than you are, just because if you're rushing yourself, you can make silly mistakes that you normally wouldn't. Any questions so far? Okay. Okay, so intuition is kind of just trusting your gut. So if you read something and it sounds wrong when you're reading it, then it probably is going to be wrong. So plug in every single answer choice, and also make sure that you are watching out for conversational English. So sometimes what you're used to saying is not necessarily grammatically correct, or just make sure that this is formal writing, and so that's kind of different than how you would normally speak. So when people say should've, as in like should apostrophe VE, sometimes people will spell it as should of, even though it's just a contraction for should have. So that's just kind of one of those examples of just watching out for like the difference between how you would talk and how it is going to end up being on the test. I'll wait a second to make sure everybody gets that written down. Is everyone fine if I erase this? Okay, so now that we talked a little bit about pacing, I want to go through kind of like the actual breakdown of what you have on the test. So, you have 45 minutes to take the test. There are 5 passages. So that comes out to 9 minutes per passage. So again, most of the time that 9 minutes per passage is plenty of time for you to get done with it. So make sure that you are double checking your answers. At the same time, you don't want to be wasting too much time and like going really slow, but just be aware that you might have more time than you think. Okay, so there are 75 questions on the test, and so there are 15 questions per passage, and that also means that you have 36 seconds to answer each question. Now, most of the time, you're probably not going to spend the full 36 seconds on it, but there might be a couple that take you a little bit longer to answer, and that's completely okay. So that just kind of helps you to know kind of like the breakdown of how much time you technically have to answer each question, but I wouldn't like rely on that and like make sure that you're spending exactly 36 seconds on each question. so kind of like what we talked about with that gut feeling, use your rules first. So we'll go through a bunch of different grammar rules. Use those first. If that fails, if you don't remember some of them, use your gut feeling second. So again, if it sounds wrong, most of the time it probably is going to be wrong. And then all of these are supposed to be written at a 9th grade level. So nobody should have like a difficult time understanding what they are saying. Like you shouldn't have trouble like understanding the context of it. You will not be tested on spelling, vocabulary, or the Oxford comma. Does anybody not know what the Oxford comma is? Okay, sweet. Instead, you are tested on punctuation, grammar, style, usage, and organization. So just be aware that sometimes if you think that one of these 3 things is what like the question looks like it's questioning you about, then it's probably about something else. And so don't just rely on that for choosing the answer that you think is wrong, because they're not testing you on those. So make sure you're looking for something else. Okay, so everyone good? Can I erase this? So now, let's get into when you are taking the test, instead of just going over some of the basics. Okay, so the most important rule is the economy rule, meaning less is more. So if you can say essentially the exact same thing in less words, that's probably the answer that you're going to want to choose. So a lot of times when people are taking the ACT, especially for the first time and they don't really know what to expect, they'll try to choose the answer that just kind of like sounds the most intelligent. And so a lot of times that is like a really wordy choice. And so you want to go with not necessarily just the one that has the least amount of words or is the simplest, but if it says the exact same thing without using as much words. So get rid of the redundancy. So an example sentence, the food was delicious, tasty, and amazing. You don't really need all 3 adjectives there because they're all essentially saying the same thing. So you can get rid of these 2, or if some of the other options, or if one of the options had just like one of these 3, then you would want to choose that. Again, it's redundant because we don't need all 3 of these, we get the point with just one of those adjectives. Okay, any questions so far? Okay, then we are going to get into like the sentence structure and then go through some more rules. Everyone good? Can I erase this? So with sentence structure, we have two different types of clauses. The first one is an independent clause, and that one can stand alone. It has to have a subject and a verb, it can have more to it. Basically, it's a complete sentence and it makes sense on its own. So these are two very simple sentences, but they make sense on their own. You don't have to add anything else to them for it to be a complete sentence. So she likes dogs, it's a complete sentence, it makes sense. He can run, again, it makes sense. You don't have to add anything else to it to make it a complete sentence. Okay, so now the opposite of that is your dependent clauses. They are not complete sentences on their own. You have to add something else to them for it to make sense. It can't stand alone by itself. So these are two examples. Because they're cute and after school today. We don't have a subject on either of them. So like with the first one, well, because there's no subject, we don't know what's cute. And after school today, we don't know what's after school. So it doesn't make sense to leave it like that on its own. And again, we are missing the subject. We have the verb, we don't have the subject. It could kind of be opposite. So sometimes it'll have a subject, but it won't have a verb. But for it to be a complete sentence, it has to have both a subject and a verb. Okay, so then we have conjunctions, which are going to connect words, phrases, and clauses. So they are for, and, nor, but, or, yet, so. So those are kind of like the common ones. There is a whole entire list of them in the ACT 36 book, and they refer to these as fanboys. So they kind of shorten it, and that's what they refer to them as. So this example sentence, the toddler wants cake and ice cream at his party. So here's our conjunction right here. This time it's just connecting words. It's connecting cake and ice cream. Pretty simple. But then we can also have conjunctive adverbs, which separate two clauses. then the conjunctive adverbs, the most common ones are therefore, however, also, moreover, and otherwise. And so you'll see those referred to as your thamos. I think that's how you say it. I don't know. In the ACT 36 book, they'll refer to your fanboys and your thamos multiple times in there. So if you see me shorten it up there, that's what I'm referring to. And so an example for this would be, I want to go shopping with my friends, however, they are all busy. So these are two independent clauses, and then we combine them with one of these conjunctive adverbs. So both of these are separate sentences. They could stand alone by themselves, but we combine them together. Okay, are there any questions so far? Yes.
Could those combine two dependent clauses or not? Because it just says separate two clauses.
Right. I'm trying to think of, I'm pretty sure it's just two independent clauses. I'm trying to think of when, or it has to have one independent clause.
Okay.
So like it could also combine an independent and a dependent, but it has to have at least one independent clause.
Alright.
If that makes sense. So now we are going to get into some of the kind of like random rules that are just kind of helpful to know. So with these, you're not necessarily going to be asked questions about the rules per se. So it's not like they're gonna say, oh, what's a conjunctive adverb? Or like they're not gonna give you a word and say what part of speech is this. But the reason why you want to know all of these grammar rules is, or like what these things are, is because you'll be questioned on how they're used in the sentences and in the passage. So it helps to just kind of understand what they are first before they're used in the passage. Okay, so now the difference between adjectives and adverbs, they're both descriptive words. Adjectives, they describe nouns. Adverbs can describe a verb, an adverb, or an adjective, and they will typically end in ly. So if you see an ly, or if you see a word that ends in ly and they're using it to describe a noun, then you probably know that that one is not going to be correct, because it needs that, most of the time that's going to tell you that it's an adverb, and that needs to either be describing a verb, an adjective, or another adverb. Okay. So now we're going to get into like simplifying sentences. Okay, so if they're asking you about subject-verb agreement, a lot of times they'll throw in like extra stuff in there. So like they'll throw in a bunch of prepositional phrases, and then that kind of throws you off a little bit. So when you're doing that, just simplify the sentence so that it's just the subject and the verb, and then you can read it and see if it makes sense. So for this sentence, we can cross off this prepositional phrase, that little thing in the middle. So ketchup, one of the best known condiments, was first made in the 17th century. So if we get rid of that, then we have ketchup was first made in the 17th century. That's a lot easier for you to read and see if the subject and the verb are going to agree together. So because ketchup is singular, this verb works for it. And so another thing to make note of is that if you have two subjects, if it has and in between your two subjects, then you want to go with the plural verb. So okay, so for this sentence, salt and pepper are both on the table. So we have two subjects right here. Because it has and, we need to go with the verb that is plural. Now if we have the word or, so if you have like or nor, then you go with the second subject or whichever subject is closest to the verb. Okay, so like I said, if you have or nor, you need to go with the last subject or whichever subject is closest to the verb. So tennis or soccer is her favorite sport. So soccer, this is the subject that is closest to the verb. So we need to go with the verb that is going to agree with just this subject. We can kind of push this off to the side. We don't need to worry about that. So we cross that off. Soccer is her favorite sport. That makes sense. Those two, that's like, it's a correct sentence. The subject agrees with the verb. So that's the one that you're going to want to choose. Now, if it was like this one before and it said tennis and soccer, then we would have to go with are because you have to go with the plural verb. Is anybody still writing down or can I erase this? Okay, so now this rule is one that people get messed up on a lot. I believe it is on page 25 in the ACT 36 book. Let me double check on that. least in my book, I don't know if yours is like a newer version or anything, I'm assuming it's the same, but these are, they have like a whole entire list of words that when you read them, they look like they would be plural, but they are actually singular. So that can kind of throw you off. Make sure that you're choosing a singular verb for these. So the reason why they say each is one body, because a lot of the words that have like each, one, or body in them, so like everyone, anyone, anybody, everybody, someone, no one, those types of words are going to act singular. So make sure that you're choosing the singular verb for those. And again, there's a whole list of them on page 25 in your ACT 36 book that you can look at. So a couple examples here. So these are 3 example sentences. Each of my cousins, loves car racing. So we can cross off of my cousins and each loves car racing. So again, each, it looks like it would be plural, but it's going to act singular, so we need to go with the verb that would agree with a singular subject. Again, this goes back to the simplifying your sentences, crossing off those prepositional phrases, and just getting down to the subject and the verb. So, someone who is a good cook should teach me how. We can cross off who is a good cook, and then we have someone should teach me how. Again, should agrees with a singular subject, and so that's why we want to go with that. And then everyone took his own snacks to the party. So one thing that I want to point out with this is a lot of times people would say everyone took their own snacks to the party, but because this is singular, you can't say their because that is plural. So instead, a lot of times you'll see, they'll say like his or her own snacks to the party. So sometimes they actually will have that on the ACT, so just be aware that these are singular, and so this also needs to be singular. Are there any questions so far? Okay, so now along with that, there are some special circumstances. So if it is like an amount of something, then it can stay plural. So if it's like, if it says a fraction of, none of, things like that, those are going to stay plural. So a fraction of the pizzas were burned. So because it's a fraction of something, you can use the plural verb, and again, none of, it's a part of something, then you want to go with the plural verb again. Any questions on that? Okay, so now reflexive pronouns, they have to reflect back on something. So reflexive pronouns are kind of like his self, herself, myself, themselves. You can't have it by itself without something else that it refers back to. So a good way to know if it's like if it has something that it's referring back to is to draw an arrow from your reflexive pronoun back to what it's referring to, and if there's nothing that it's referring to, then you shouldn't be using it in that, and it's wrong. So, a couple example sentences. Okay, so we have a couple example sentences here. Michelle and myself went for ice cream. So our reflexive pronoun is myself, and we don't have anything that it refers back to. We don't have, it's referring to yourself, so you would need to have like I or something like that in here. So because this has nothing to reflect back to, can't draw my arrow on anything, cross that out. That sentence is not grammatically correct. This one, I sent myself the recipe. So again, it has myself, but it has something to reflect back on. It's reflecting back on I. And again, this last one, he scolded himself after he slept until 3 in the afternoon. Himself is our reflexive pronoun. We draw our arrow back to he because that is what it's reflecting back on. So again, draw your arrows if it has nothing to reflect back on. If you can't draw an arrow to anything, then it's not grammatically correct, and that is wrong. Any questions? Okay, we just have a little bit left to get through today. The way that I'm planning on doing it is going through kind of all of like the strategies, all of the like grammatical rules, and getting through all of those first before doing practice passages, just so you have all of that beforehand. So it's going to be a little bit like writing heavy at the beginning, but then at least you have all those rules to look back on to begin with, and not like as you're going along and learning new stuff, you're trying to do practice passages in class. Okay, so with modifier agreement, just make sure that everything is makes sense logically, that like the adjectives or all the words, the way that they're lined up, it makes sense. So we have two sentences that are very similar. The only difference is that one phrase is switched as to where its placement is. So we have the dog ate his treats in the light blue collar, and the dog in the light blue collar ate his treats. Now, the second one is more specific, or it makes more sense as to in the light blue collar. If we go with the first one, then it's a little bit unsure of if the dog is wearing the light blue collar or if the treats are in the light blue collar, which doesn't really make much sense logically. It would make more sense that the dog would be wearing this collar. And so you want to have those phrases right next to what they're describing, otherwise it can change the meaning of the sentence, and then it gets a little bit confusing. Okay, that was all I have to get through today, so like got through all the rules. We do have more rules to get through, but are there any questions about anything that I've gone through today? Okay, one other thing that I wanted to mention is that this ACT 36 book, especially for English, is going to be a really useful resource. I've heard people refer to it as like the Bible before for the English ACT. So if you have any questions or if you're confused about something, this is a really good resource to turn back to because it has all those all of those rules plus